Thank you so much for joining us today for the Government Relations Town Hall with NCBA CLUSA. Just a few words before we get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a highly anticipated Government Relations Town Hall. We appreciate you taking the time to be here as we discuss key policy updates and advocacy efforts that are currently impacting our work and communities. At NCBA, we know that strong government relations are essential to advancing our mission, and this town hall is an opportunity to share those insights, answer your questions, and keep you informed on what's ahead. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our President and CEO, Doug O'Brien, who will kick things off. Doug, over to you.
Oops, I'm sorry. I'm going to jump in here because Doug, you and Leah are both off audio, so we can't hear anything.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, yeah, I want to thank Janady and join her in thanking everyone for taking the time to be part of this conversation today. We do know it is a timely one. We had planned to do a webinar like this to preview the new Congress, the new administration, and to talk about the co-op priorities. Obviously, in the last 8 or 9 days, things have become even more acute around a policy conversation as things have evolved very quickly. So here's the agenda that we'll have today, and I look forward to sharing the podium here today with Leoned, our Director of Government Relations, who's sitting right to my left, actually, and we'll talk about, just real briefly, the very timely 2025 year of cooperatives. Just a slide on the overview of the Cooperative Business Playbook, which is kind of our policy agenda for the cooperative community. We'll talk about the federal policy landscape, including the executive orders, as well as some issues in the new Congress. And then we have some slides that go more deeply into the cooperative policy priorities. So there is question and answer. Please feel free to use that platform. We have a couple staff that are tracking that. As we get to the conversation around federal policy, including the executive orders, we'll pause for some question to answer at that point, and then we'll definitely have time at the end for a broader conversation. So please, yeah, just track your Q&A and in the chat there for direction on that. So next slide. So just very quickly, everybody here probably knows that National Cooperative Business Association, CLUSA International, we're the apex association for all kinds of cooperatives here in the United States. We have representation from essentially every sector of cooperatives in our membership association. There's some of the significant numbers that indicate the scale and the scope of cooperatives here in the United States. 140 million memberships in credit unions, over 40 million people, members of rural electric cooperatives, the vast majority of agriculture that goes through farmer cooperatives, farmer-owned businesses in one way or the other. Of course, there's many other very important sectors that we work with and represent. Next slide. 2025 is indeed the year of cooperatives. It's been proclaimed by the 192 government leaders in the United Nations, and the focus on the year of cooperatives here in the United States is to raise awareness of the cooperative business model, what it can mean for communities and for its members, and to advocate for cooperatives. That was our goal as we determined it last year, as we're planning for 2025. Obviously, it could not come at a better time. We have a number of resources that are coming down the pike to help really optimize and leverage this year of cooperatives, including very soon, the next couple of weeks, a co-op impact report, a 50-page report that gathers really the key data from all the different sectors, as well as some really compelling stories. We think it's going to be a great advocacy tool. And then a little bit later, toward our membership meeting in early May, we'll have a social media Year of Cooperatives toolkit and a number of other tools and public awareness over the year. Next slide. So the cooperative difference, of course, probably just about everybody on this call understands that there is a real distinction to the cooperative business model. I'm not going to read each one of those, but as we think about communicating to stakeholders and in particular policymakers, talking about how cooperatives are a better strategy for reinvesting in local economies, for ensuring high quality jobs, to source more goods locally, and worker co-ops feature higher worker productivity, and just simply more responsive to community needs. So, there is a reason why policymakers should treat cooperatives fairly and indeed in times with preference. Next slide, please. We have a cooperative business playbook. We actually finalized that. I think it was in mid to late December. It's essentially our policy agenda. You can find it on our website. Aaliyah is going to, a little bit later in today's webcast, get into more detail that it's designed really for the cooperative community to use in its education and advocacy of Congress, and how important in the scale and scope, the impact that cooperatives make. Those policy priorities that are within, you see them listed there. Fair tax treatment obviously is a huge conversation going on in Congress right now. We're engaged with America's credit unions and the rest of the cooperative community, and the credit union committee as they engage in their Don't Tax My Co-op campaign. We're working with farmer cooperatives and worker cooperatives on 199A to ensure that that's extended. We continue our work on ensuring that cooperatives can access capital through the Small Business Administration. We know that housing cooperatives are a real solution in the housing crisis. There's a lot more interest in worker co-ops, particularly around transition from small businesses to worker co-ops. And of course, the Farm Bill is still a live conversation with many co-op varieties within. Next slide. Thank you, Joe. So federal policy, executive orders, maybe, this is partly where many of you are interested in this very timely conversation. For those following the news, you certainly have seen that on January 20th, the new administration released over 20 executive orders on a myriad of topics, including 4 that we mentioned here. The topics related to energy policy and climate in the Inflation Reduction Act, policy related to gender, policy related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and finally, international development assistance funding. Now, those are just 4 of the nearly 30 executive orders that were released on December 20th. And in each of these, the sort of the spirit of most of them is if there is a program that's focused specifically on this area, the administration has directed that the agency or the department that is implementing that program, that it either pause or even cancel some of those programs. And then sort of the next step, it has instructed that agency or department to review the contracts, the cooperative agreements, the grants that it has, to ensure that those grants, cooperative agreements, et cetera, are aligned with the executive order, which for most of them, it means a 90-day, potentially 90-day pause on some of the grants and awards while the agency has an opportunity to review. And what occurs after that review is not certain. It's that's part of the theme on the executive orders, is that it is a very fluid and evolving situation. We'll go to the next slide, and then I'm going to hand to Aaliyah, and then we'll have some questions. So this week, there were a number of things that occurred. Early in the week, I think it was Monday, there was a directive that came out of the White House Office of Management and Budget to pause essentially all federal grants and contracts, except for a number of really significant programs that went right to individuals. Since that time, I think late on Tuesday, the White House rescinded that memo, but in the interim has made clear that the executive orders that we referenced in the prior slide on the topics around DEI, environment, gender, et cetera, that those are still in place, and that in fact the federal government, continues to review and in some cases pause or suspend the implementation of the programs. So, so that's it kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. And then importantly, there's some really important litigation that's occurring as well that can impact both the near term and the long term of these awards. And I'll just kind of finish this slide with that last bullet point. It is indeed a very fluid situation that features daily refinements to the directives, and those refinements to the executive orders. They might be coming from the White House Office of Management and Budget. They might be coming from the agency that's charged with implementing the particular program or project. But we see, on a daily basis, we've seen this evolve. And then, of course, litigation is going to impact how things happen as well. I think, we'll get into some question and answer, but I think the key is to be, stay very informed. And if you are an entity that has a grant or a cooperative agreement or a contract, to ensure that you're monitoring, those particular channels of communication, whether it's more general communication on their website, or even emails to your points of contact, et cetera. So that's to kind of start the conversation on executive orders. I'm going to ask Aaliyah just to talk a little bit about the other really important piece of federal policy these days, and that's the new Congress and some of the activity that we see there. And then we're going to pause for questions around federal policy. So please, Aaliyah.
Yeah, thank you, Doug, and to everyone joining us. Really appreciate your interest, engagement, and the work that you all do each and every day to serve your co-op members and communities. Looking at the other side of the federal government here, the 119th Congress began earlier this month, and there has been a change in leadership across the Senate, with Republicans essentially having a trifecta in government, the White House, the Senate, and the House. There's a narrow majority in both chambers. However, it's been an active few weeks, and the current items at the top of Congress is working to get a budget extension, as the federal government funding is set to expire on March 14th. As Doug mentioned, the Farm Bill, which has been a consistent priority of ours and the programs that support cooperatives, was extended back in December through September 30th of this year. And with that narrow majority in both chambers, Congress and leadership in Congress is currently negotiating on a budget reconciliation process to pass those key priorities with a simple majority. Tax is at the top of the ticket, with some of the expiring provisions that impact cooperatives that we can dive into a little later. But with a new Congress, and as you can see, 70 plus new members this Congress, more than 200 since the 2017 tax package was passed and the last Farm Bill. Education, outreach from cooperators early and often, highlighting that cooperative difference that we recognize impact on our communities, will be key in building and continuing to grow our support across Congress. Outreach and education on our advocacy priorities really is crucial at this moment, particularly as we see things moving swiftly over the next few weeks, with some of the harder timelines that they are working against, and federal policy impacts, and highlighting that, intended, unintended, will be an ongoing process that we'll need folks' help in, and especially with our key priorities where there's been some leadership changes and we still have strong support.
Great. Thank you, Leah. We're 15 minutes in here, and we'll just pause to see if there's any questions, answers. We do look forward to continuing a presentation on the cooperative policy priorities that we have for this Congress and in this administration. Any questions or comments right now? And I'm not sure if those are in the chat or if they're teed up in other places.
Yep.
And
so we got
Okay.
We got a question here for you, Doug and Aaliyah, from John Michael Torres with the Federation of Worker Co-ops. If Congress authorized the funds going to the projects that are subject to the reviews under the executive orders, what is the extent of the administration's legal authority to cancel the project's funding?
Mhm. I think it's a very good question, John Michael. I think it's one that that a number of courts are considering right now. Without being an expert in appropriations law, I will say two things. One, that question is likely to be answered differently for different programs. Different programs have a different level of congressional directive. Some that provide the agency or the department more discretion than others. So that's one thing, is that it could very well vary across different types of programs. I forget what the second thing I was going to say. I think it's, that's a question that's going to be tested as we read in the press right now.
And we got another question here regarding USDA's Socially Disadvantaged Groups Grant Program. Could the USDA SDGG program be one that is vulnerable to executive orders?
What?
So
Go ahead.
to jump in here, there was a list of programs that were released across the federal government in accordance with the memo that was issued earlier this week. And there were quite a lot of programs on there, including across the federal agencies, over 2,600 of them, if I believe was the last count that I saw. So it looks like all of those programs are subject to review to be in compliance with the executive order. In terms of speaking to specific programs, it's really highlighting how they align with policies outlined within each of the executive orders and policies of the administration across the board, and highlighting the difference that they make in communities every day.
Mhm.
But I'll turn it to Doug for anything else to add on that one.
No, the only thing I'd add to that is our as Aaliyah just said, our understanding that as we see from that what has become a public document, SDGG is in, along with 2,000 plus 2,500 plus other programs across the federal government that is being reviewed, and as Aaliyah just noted, that it's being reviewed across the policy agenda, the policy priorities of the new administration. But back to John Michael's question, that actually does beg the question, is it still legal in the eyes of the court on particular determinations? And that's to be seen.
Great, thank you, Doug and Aaliyah. Another question about USDA programming. Is USDA's award for ARPA Technical Assistance Initiative in danger of rescission/impoundment, or is a contract in place that protects this award?
I think, honestly, at this moment, there's not as much certainty as there was 12 days ago, before January 20th. And, those executive orders that I pointed to around climate and environment, around DEIA, gender and foreign assistance, those are policies that the new administration has made very clear that they are going to review. And so, if a particular program falls within that umbrella, I think, I think they are going to review it, and we'll know in weeks or a small number of months on the determination of that review.
And on tax policy, we have a question. Has the new administration expressed any position on tax treatment of co-ops or overall legal framework of co-ops federally?
Yes, I can speak to the conversation that's going on in terms of the tax treatment of cooperatives. A big piece of this conversation that we'll go into when it comes to preserving the fair tax treatment of co-ops is the 199A deduction for agricultural worker multi-stakeholder cooperatives. That was a part of the 2017 tax package. And as a part of the negotiations that are ongoing right now, they're looking for pay-fors, a way to supplement some of the big ticket priorities for reconciliation. And one of the items on that list is a threat to the cooperative tax status and credit union specifically. When it comes to how we can do outreach and education, on the difference that cooperatives make, showing the broader ecosystem that we have across sectors is going to be really, really key, particularly based on the myth that cooperatives, credit unions don't pay taxes when we're reinvesting taxes, jobs locally, billions of dollars, which we can get into the data points there. Actually, credit unions do pay in taxes and cooperatives pay in taxes. So I just wanted to highlight sort of that part of the conversation, but anything to add? Doug?
Nothing to add to that. Thanks.
And we'll keep moving on. We got a couple more questions coming in the chat. So impounding of current grants is a possible outcome of these reviews. Should we be planning for that as a possibility?
I think that so I'm just going to echo some of the things that I've heard, in different conversations, in different webinars, and actually I'm going to bring a little bit of some experience that NCBA CLUSA has had, because as many or most of beyond being a 501c6 membership association for all kinds of cooperatives, we also implement foreign assistance, that is, foreign aid through USAID and USDA, helping people across the world use cooperatives to advance the economy and capture economic opportunity. So on USAID, beginning last early Saturday morning, we received some stop work orders for USAID grants and projects that we administer or that we're a sub contractor in administering. And about 10 of those different programs, and we've received stop work orders on each of those, and we're working through those. Now, that's, to my knowledge, the only agency in the federal government that's provided those stop work orders is USAID. And it's quite possible that it is occurring in some of the other agencies. I just heard a rumor this morning that someone with the USDA contract or actually cooperative agreement received one of those, but honestly I haven't been able to talk to that person specifically, so I'm not certain exactly what that circumstance was. That's a long way of saying that that given the penumbra of things that are occurring, it seems possible that that some agencies on different projects may be providing direction for the suspension or the stop while this review goes on. But again, I haven't heard specifically in kind of first person that this has been occurring at USDA at this point. So yes, should you get ready? It's something you probably should start thinking about, just in terms of prudence on what that would what that would mean, what that work would look like with your particular entity in terms of responding to that, and of course also think about communicating with your elected officials on what it means for the community, what it means for their district.
And to help add to that and maybe answer another question in terms of specific talking points, messaging, highlighting always the work that you're doing in your community, in terms of educating folks about the work that you are doing is really the crux of it here. The Cooperative Business Playbook is some of the key points for education and maybe how to frame the conversation or contextualize it to your cooperative in educating folks about the work that you're doing and the unintended consequences potentially.
Another question related to NCBA's work from Kevin Edberg saying, NCBA has contracts/agreements with organizations to implement ARPA TA activity. With whom should we speak with at NCBA regarding how we should manage these contracted activities?
Well, with your point of contact, that's probably Bernardo, Kevin, and I can say, as I walked in this room, we had not received any type of directive or communication from USDA on those resources, and as an entity here, until we do receive some type of guidance or directive from our funding agency, we are certainly continuing to implement as the grant that we received or a cooperative agreement that received requires.
And Aaliyah, I know you just mentioned the co-op playbook, but we have another question about what terminology and language should we be using in advocating for co-ops within the new administration?
In terms of the terminology or language, I think always talking about the work that's specific to your cooperative. For example, if you're working on a program that is intended to support or create new businesses, talking about the jobs created, the impact that you're making in your local community, the work that you are doing each and every day. For additional sort of resources, some background on these issues and potential key programs, our advocacy website has a ton of material on there that's recently updated as well with some of our latest publications, but really just highlighting the economic difference that you all are making each and every day with cooperative businesses in partnership with other cooperatives and through some of the key technical assistance programs that are provided through the federal government. That might be a key point for education and how to sort of raise awareness in a way that might resonate with your member of Congress.
Another question about the effects of the executive orders. Seeing these recent executive orders, is there an anticipation that presidential budgets will be, and the willingness of Congress to go along with these executive orders, is there any feeling that the presidential budget will become less of a suggestion and more of a directive in future years? And any advice on how to anticipate this potential shift?
I think that well, two things. One, that's to be seen. I think it's hard to predict exactly that dynamic between the budget and how Congress would receive it. As someone who's worked in both Capitol Hill and in the executive, I can say that the White House budget many times has limited influence on Congress. When the White House is in the same party, sometimes it does have more influence. Just historically, it just remains to be seen. I think that as the dynamic between this new White House and the new leadership of Congress kind of unfolds in the future.
And circling back to a question from earlier, who are the biggest cooperative champions in Congress?
Well, let me take that one real quick, and then Aaliyah will have smarter things to say. The best champions, hands down, by far, always, are people who live in the district, the individual members, the individual farmers, the individual, small businesses who are members of co-ops, and their direct communication to their congressperson or their senator. That's like hands down, always the best advocate. In more generally, if the question is asking about in Washington, D.C., there's a whole constellation of associations that do fantastic work on behalf of cooperatives, including America's Credit Unions, National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, the National Housing Co-op Association, and the list goes on, including National Co-op Grocers and others. We work in coalition with all of these folks, in particular when there's when there's priorities of cooperatives that are truly threatened, whether that's around tax, whether that's around funding for cooperative development, or some other issues that we'll talk about a little bit. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Doug was saying, even though he stole the words right out of my mouth, that folks in the district are always the best advocates. There is a bipartisan cooperative business caucus. Again, as folks who are doing the work on the ground, the best way for us to recruit for that caucus is to have that outreach. Our chairs are Congressman Pocan and Congressman Baird, co-chairs of the caucus, and we are pushing for heavy recruitment with the start of this new Congress, as there are a few key champions who have retired. And the best way to get more members who are identified as those key go-to offices are for you to ask your members of Congress to join the caucus as well.
Okay.
And with that, I think we've gotten through a bulk of the questions, so I'll hand the gavel back over to you and Aaliyah, Doug.
Okay. Liv.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Doug. So jumping into the policy priorities, what is some of the language that we can use? What is the current state of play? Of course, we have longstanding policy priorities that are coming up right now, particularly with the expiration of the 2017 tax package and that being under reauthorization, making sure we preserve that fair tax treatment, leveraging the Farm Bill, which supports key programs for cooperative businesses and cooperative sectors, strengthening national security through locally led international cooperative development, supporting access to capital for cooperatives, the housing crisis, and investing in time-tested models to drive economic growth. Next slide, please. So just to dive a little bit deeper, as I saw a question before on the tax treatment of cooperatives, as Congress is working to negotiate a reconciliation package that will be fairly large, there are quite a few numbers being thrown out. Leadership had their retreat this week in which they were trying to determine the state of play, the actual budget for this tax package. There's also a conversation that's going on in terms of how to pay for it and offsets to that. So as those conversations are ongoing, as I mentioned, we're already seeing some of the proposals that are out there, making sure that we preserve the treatment of cooperatives, and that is longstanding federal policy, particularly in the cooperative tax status for the various sectors, and the 199A deduction is very key. And we can go to the next slide here. And I know we're short on time, so I won't dive into every single one of these in high detail, but of course, we'll share this PowerPoint out with you all. Again, looking at the various sectors that across the board that benefit from the tax treatment of cooperatives. Again, it's not unfair practices for cooperatives to be taxed in a way that reflects that the business model returns economic benefits to the member owners of the business. It's really just asking not to be put at a disadvantage compared to other forms of business. So we can go to the next slide here. The Farm Bill, as I mentioned, is set to expire on September 30th of this year. Key programs, including one of the only programs that supports cooperative development, the Rural Cooperative Development Grant Program, is up to be reauthorized. You can see bill numbers here on the side for bill text that we are working to get reintroduced, that was introduced last Congress to modernize and strengthen these programs as Congress is working on a Farm Bill. Again, there's a lot of competing priorities, so making sure that folks know how Rural Energy Savings Program, Rural Energy for America program, capacity building in rural communities, broadband, supporting our producers across the board, and increasing food security through a strong nutrition title, and international food assistance programs are really key to supporting the work we do, local economies, local communities across the board. And so we'll go to the next slide there. Promoting and facilitating cooperative ownership, another top priority, particularly right now as we see a lot of the energy and conversation around employee ownership. And supporting the conversion of businesses to cooperatives has been on NCBA CLUSA's key priority list for many years, going back to 2018 with the Main Street Employee Ownership Act, in which we sought to get increased access to capital for co-ops, and we continue to push for full implementation of that legislation. Go to the next slide here. And this is really to preserve the 2.9 million small businesses whose owners are approaching retirement age, the silver tsunami there. A key way to preserve these Main Street institutions, as we know, is to convert them to a cooperative, particularly as we see the support for growing local economies and the value added there. And a key support for that is the SBA 7A lending program, which we currently can't access. So again, pushing to remove the personal guarantee for cooperatives, because the program essentially just doesn't align with our ownership structure of multiple owners and is a burdensome requirement. There are also initiatives through the Interagency Working Group for Cooperative Development that is really an efficient use of government resources by bringing together various agencies and streamlining federal resources that support employee ownership, other cooperative sectors, and is a valuable resource for providing the key expertise and technical assistance that folks need. Going to the next slide here. As we know, the affordable housing crisis is front and center. In fact, I saw just today that this is coming to the top of the docket as the reconciliation conversation, the government funding conversation, as well as just generally addressing the needs of constituents back home in the districts of Congress members and providing housing. So for us, making sure that cooperatives are eligible for all programs that are meant to support housing, reinvigorating the long-standing and only program, the Section 213 program for cooperative housing, and making sure that folks have access to the resources that they need. As we know, go to the next slide, please. Cooperatives and resident-owned communities are a time-tested solution. Limited equity cooperatives that provide permanently affordable housing, ROCs, allowing folks who live in manufactured housing communities to own that community and invest in the services they need. And just making sure that folks know that cooperatives are a lower risk to lenders and the federal government, which is a proven thing. So we should be investing in this model. And next slide, please. So that covers the policy priorities. I know we've thrown a lot of information at you today, but just want to pause for any additional questions here.
I think this may have been touched on earlier, but we got another question about it as you were going through the slides there, Leah. Are NCBA CLUSA, USAID, and USDA international projects on hold at this time?
There are, it's a qualified, yes, the qualified is, we've received for USAID projects, we've received a stop work order. And that essentially means we need to stop doing non-essential work until there's an opportunity for the agency to review. We're providing them information that they seek, etc. Those are only for the USAID projects. We've not received stop work orders for the international programs related to the U.S. Department of Agriculture Foreign Ag Service. So we're continuing to implement those programs, and as I said before, we'll, per the grant, per the cooperative agreement, we're going to continue to do the work until we're directed otherwise. And on we also have some domestic projects that Kevin alluded to before. We've not received any, stop work or pause on those either. So we're continuing to implement those.
Maybe to jump in with a question that I've seen here in the chat. The good news for cooperatives is that we know that we have support across various sectors, strong partners, as Doug mentioned, who are with us every day in this work, and key supporters across the federal government in the halls of Congress who understand the difference that cooperatives make. who are there as identified folks to push for cooperatives as a solution to many of these key problems, not just through the caucus, but through the relationships you all build with your members of Congress and your representatives back home, as they know you personally, oftentimes on a first name basis. So you all have an extremely ripe opportunity with the year of the cooperatives, which is great news for us, to continue to build those relationships and that support across the board.
Okay.
And looking at our Q&A, not seeing any further questions at this moment. Oh, I
See
see
one that
one more
just
that
popped
just
up
came
here.
in. Is there any place on the NCBA website we should look to see which programs you work with have received stop work orders at a given point in time?
Alexa, not at this point. And I'll just be candid and say I'm not sure that that's something, not because it's some big secret, but it's not really part of our external work. So we're not planning on doing that right now.
Another question here: with our supranatorial, multi-sectorial umbrella company of African business co-ops, which concern 17 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, we are happy. Oh, just a comment here. Apologies.
Yeah.
Comment from our project there.
Yeah, appreciate that comment. And maybe I'll pick up on on one of the threads in that comment, and it also picks up on a question and some comments that Aaliyah made, and how we're talking about cooperatives in that good news. Again, cooperatives do have great appeal to different types of policy agenda, in a policy agenda that really focuses on building markets, on creating prosperity, a policy agenda that focuses on creating safer communities or stronger communities. Co-ops have an answer. Co-ops create jobs. Co-ops create more economic activity in local communities. Co-ops provide the stability, in community, in the economy, whether that's domestic or globally, so that there's so that people can stay in their communities, so that they can enjoy greater security. So there's a lot of great impacts that cooperatives have that we can and should be talking about. Joe, I'm not sure if there's any more. We certainly don't want to use folks' time any more than we need to. These are terrifically busy days. And unless we see any more, I'll ask Aaliyah if you have any other final comments, and then I'll close it up.
Yeah, just want to let folks know the government relations team is here to answer any questions as you continue to see information coming out through advocacy alerts, including notices for events, town halls, opportunities to have live question and answers like these. Please do reach out to us. Would encourage folks to check out the Cooperative Business Playbook, look at some of those more specific opportunities and talking points, but really just don't hesitate to reach out. We are here to help keep you all informed. And similarly appreciate the partnership in helping us stay informed as well in what you're seeing in your co-ops.
Yeah, just building on that very quickly, reminding folks that it is 2025 year of cooperatives. And very soon we're going to start to provide resources for the cooperative community to increase public awareness and advocacy. We already have a great resource that we talked about today. Please do, take a look at, and please use the Cooperative Business Playbook that was referenced in the chat. It's also on our advocacy webpage on our website. So yeah, and the last thing is that we look forward to continuing this conversation, and we will foresee in the near future, as as policy developments evolve, we'll be offering more of these types of conversation as this audience finds useful. we thank you for everything you do in your community, and thanks for what you do for the cooperative community, and hope you have a great day.
Take care of everyone.